Could everyone please mute yourself if you haven't had the chance to already? Um, so welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yves Phileas, and we are here today talking about capping Robin Moses' South Bronx Health Justice. Quick little introduction by myself. My name again is Yves Phileas, currently male district leader of the 77th Assembly District, also candidate for the 16th Council here in the Bronx. Born and raised, first generation American, Lincoln Hospital, St. Augustine's School, St. Augustine's Church in the Bronx, as well, graduate of Bronx Community College, John J. Rice High School, and currently a grad student at Columbia University. In my 9 to 5, I am a lobbyist for the New York Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU of New York. So I'm very, very proud to be here to speak about something that's near and dear to my heart. And next on our panel, we have Miss Maria Forbes. Can you please introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, Maria Forbes. I am the president of the Clay Avenues Tenants Association. I like wear many hats. I'm a representative for the United Nations for National Congress for Neighborhood Women. I travel around the world to speak on public housing. I also just started my own incorporation, which I should have done many years ago, but now Maria Forbes Incorporated. Resource entitlement eligibility specialist. I'm also a CERT team chief, which is for emergency management in my community planning board. I sit, and when the team is activated, we then go out and we activate or assist in the evacuation center to help families who need to be evacuated on the event of emergency. Um, it's just so overwhelming to do the many things that I do in the community. I'm working 24 hours a day almost. But I was born and raised in the Bronx all of my life. I'm very familiar expressway because like both of my properties of my parents' house was in connection, whether it was through High Bridge being on the Major Deacon end of it, or literally being on 172nd Street
All
in
right, Miss
Clinton
Maria.
Avenue.
We're
All
not
right,
going right into it right now. We're still going
just an
through an
introduction.
introduction. All right. All right, so thank you. So next we have Dr. Diana Hernandez.
Hi, good afternoon. I am Diana Hernandez. I am first and foremost a Bronx girl. I grew up on 165th Street in Philly. And for part of my time growing up, I was also on in the Melrose section of the Bronx, and we'll get into some of that later. But my day job, I'm an associate professor of sociological sciences at Columbia University, and I also lead a number of initiatives around connecting community members with researchers at the university. In my spare time, done some social impact real estate investing, basically meaning that we have 3 small multifamily properties and invite businesses to come back in this work. And so I'm happy to be on the panel. Thank you.
All right, and next we have Mr. Michael Johnson.
Hello, Brother Reeves. Thank you so much for inviting me to this discussion. My name is Michael Johnson. I'm a co-founding member of South Bronx Unite, an environmental, economic, and social justice advocacy coalition that's working primarily out of Mott Haven and Port Morris. I live here in Mott Haven for more than 20 years, raising a family, and served on the Bronx Community Board 1 for about 9 years. I've been advocating for environmental justice because of the situation we're going to discuss later, that you all know very well. I'm also a board member of the Mott Haven Port Morris Community Land Stewards, probably right now one of the oldest incorporated community land trusts in the Bronx, 1 of 5. Thank you for having me.
Very, very happy to have everyone here. It is great lineup, and we will be joined by our Assemblywoman, Latoya Joyner, who will be joining us shortly. What is the Cross Bronx Expressway? The Cross Bronx Expressway, or CBE, is a 7-mile long, 220-foot wide trench that cuts through 15 neighborhoods across the borough of the Bronx. It was incepted after World War II, and the Great New Deal was derived from President at the time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And for most of the monies, resources that was created from Social Security, large funds from the federal government made way for infrastructure. And this was one of the gifts that was bestowed to the Bronx. In the middle of the 20th century, some of the world's largest water and electrical lines were carefully preserved or located during the construction, 2 decades long construction of the massive roadway. Such care was not afforded to the thousands of families that stood in the way of this mega infrastructure project led by the infamous Robert Moses. The Bronx resists, as you can see. Moses's plans called for the demolition of thousands of homes and businesses. A coalition of residents, led mostly by local housewives and Black and brown families moving into areas, fought the plan for decades. And as you can see, this is an actual flyer of that was spread around the Bronx by, if you didn't see at the lower hand, the Communist Party of the Bronx. So the Bronx was very vocal from day one. Instead of cutting through more neighborhoods and bulldozing more homes, there was at one point an alternate proposal to follow the northern border of Crotona Park to avoid mass displacement. But of course, Moses went for the most destructive route possible. It was the most expensive mile of road ever built at the point in time, costing $40 million, which in today's money is $382 million. And on a personal note, the proposed relocated route where I'm hovering my mouse, in those following years, my grandfather bought his brownstone in the early 60s and where I grew up and my home. And if that didn't occur, I mean, the proposed route may have still been under my grandfather's brownstone as opposed to behind it, causing all the toxicities and fumes billowing into our neighborhood. The construction of the Cross Bronx Expressway started from 1948 and 1972. It was the first highway built through a crowded urban environment in the United States. At one point during construction, crews had to support the Grand Concourse, a subway line, and several elevated trains. This was the original highway to nowhere, like a cannon pointed to the Bronx, unleashing a flood of vehicular traffic. So this is what I call the beginning of Robert Moses' scar. So I would like to, 1 second, add the aftermath. Robert Moses said, "There's very little real hardship in a thing." These were the negative impacts. 60,000 people were displaced, offered $200 per room in compensation. New public housing was constructed for some displaced families. The creation of white flight happened, and the beginning of what people now call the burn occurred. 600,000 manufacturing jobs lost, and youth unemployment rose at 40%. Congestion and smog was the beginning of everything. And now, Dr. Diana, would you like to interject?
So thanks for setting that up. And I was basically kind of asked to situate my own personal stories within the South Bronx kind of essentially burning, having the backdrop of life be rubble as a result of, you know, this kind of poor planning and development that wasn't necessarily people-centered or community-centered, but was about facilitating access to areas outside of the Bronx, really. So it's interesting that this kind of talks about, in 1953, the future of the Bronx to be seen along this 7-mile man-made trench cutting through it. My mother was born in 1954. My grandmother actually came from Puerto Rico in 1940 at the very beginning of the mass migration of Puerto Ricans to New York City, but also very specifically to the South Bronx. And it was in that context of both migration and, you know, trying to make a way in an American life that my kind of story in the South Bronx kind of emerges. But it's also been a story marked by hardship and marked by kind of, as much as things have changed and time has passed, it also feels like a lot of the story around disadvantage and hardship has remained intact, even as you know, there have been so many signs of resistance and resilience. It's also been, you know, a difficult reality. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and so much of my childhood was marked by this, what they call the synergism of plagues. It was the very beginning of the HIV/AIDS epidemic that, you know, really kind of hits the Bronx pretty hard. Incarceration, mass drug use in the crack cocaine era, so deep poverty, deep and concentrated poverty, and a real lack of development and attention and investment in the community. And, you know, essentially having grown up in that context, the expectations, you know, my brother likes to say, you know, there's this kind of soft bigotry of low expectations. And in some ways, that's precisely the kind of, you know, overarching concern that happened and continues to happen, I think, in a community like the South Bronx. Some of it having to do with development and some of it not. But, you know, as a kid growing up in Section 8 housing, it was actually the advocates around the South Bronx churches and this reimagination of what the Bronx should be if it were to be done at the hands and with the vision of people within the community, that we were also able to access, you know, kind of modest home ownership opportunity. So my mom bought a condo that was imagined and developed by a community development corporation, essentially, and a faith-based organization, so South Bronx churches. But it was when I was in college that I realized that so much of this had been contextualized in a way that I didn't understand. I read this book called Amazing Grace by Jonathan Kozol, who was this white journalist from Massachusetts, came into the Bronx, studied our people, talked a lot about all of these kind of hardships that were going on, from poverty to public health, with a very specific kind of reference to asthma, but hadn't done a really good job of, you know, kind of situating this in its historical past and the kind of, you know, development challenges like the Cross Bronx that were totally ignoring the realities of the community. So I'm going to stop my comments there, but just to say that, you know, the story isn't over. I mean, one of the things that I've seen in the last 30 years for sure have been, you know, amazing community-based development projects, largely in the housing sphere, that have, you know, recreated space for community members. I think we face a very new challenge in terms of this kind of next level of development, which is not necessarily for the people from the community. So there are investments in the physical assets of the community, but not in the social assets of the community. And that is, you know, yet something else to be considered. And part of why I'm encouraged to be sitting on this panel in terms of reimagining what the Cross Bronx Expressway could and should be for the future. Thank you. You're muted, Eve.
much. I appreciate it. Just working on it. And before we continue, I would like to actually revisit our past slide, um, our past slide with Miss Forbes. Could you tell us a little bit about your upbringing at the time? And before you start, I would like to say, in tandem with Dr. Hernandez, I was too born in the 80s in the South Bronx. I talk to those that are a little bit younger than me, that I call them phoenixes because we are literally the phoenix that have risen from the ashes of this great borough, and we have to show the greatness of what we're doing. And I mean, Dr. Hernandez being the fact that I'm raised in the South Bronx, which is the jewels of our community. So, Ms. Forbes, can you please talk about your upbringing and how your parents were pillars within our community?
Good afternoon again, everyone. Wow, your story, Dr. Diane, is just so it's enriching and educating because it's so different from mine. I want to say that my parents integrated hybrid. So I was born in 1962. So where I say we really integrated, I only remember going to Catholic school with two other African American people, me, my twin sister, and another young black gentleman. And like we were the only kids there in Sacred Heart school, which was up on Shakespeare, a little off of Nelson and running around to Shakespeare. And I saw and I was raised in a different, because we integrated, so it was still some Jewish there, some Irish, different type of families there, other than just a whole integration of black people to be raised with. And I never knew the South Bronx. I knew the Grand Concourse. I knew Coney Island just because I was taken there and other things. But to see the Bronx burnt down from the pictures that we look at through this PowerPoint and through other history that I've been enlightened to, I was like, I never saw that. I never saw that because I wasn't exposed to that. But it was just a different world. I did experience that crack epidemic and that HIV epidemic that was there in the Bronx. I've never really left my foundation. I was on Nelson Avenue. I moved to the Grand Concourse. Now I'm on Clay Avenue. So I've literally still been within the same environment. And I've seen the turnover and the many different things that have happened here. But I didn't remember having asthma. I didn't remember having asthma. I didn't remember a lot of children having asthma from the pollution that we are exposed to on a regular basis, that our children is exposed to. Like so many, even of the high blood pressure and the diabetes and everything else that we are plagued with because of the environment we live in. It was just not here in the 70s, because now I'm going to go to 72. By the time I was 10 years old, I still did not see all of the disastrous impact that our community suffer today. It was just not here. It really, really was not here. Um, but through the lack of elected officials and other people fighting for services and stuff. But I will say to you that my mother was a mental health therapist in her time. She fought. She sat outside and closed down social service offices. If anybody knows Joanne Smitherman from High Bridge, like we met her around 1972, and she was a very good advocate that her and my mother fought. We had play streets then. We knew the parks department on a regular first name basis, that we came in. We had events and stuff in the park. So when I tell you that there were people here fighting for services and things like that, but did we got them at such a small portion to know that the rest of the Bronx, beyond the east side of the Grand Concourse, was completely burnt out, and all of that was going on over there. It's like, shush. It's I don't even know what to say because I wasn't exposed to that. But staying west of the Grand Concourse, and then my children growing up, and my children started to develop asthma. They went to St. Angela Merici. You know, most Catholic schools are from kindergarten to the eighth grade. And one day when I went into the clinic, Montefiore was such a small little clinic on 162nd Street. I came in like 3 days in a row, and I said, "When are you going to give me a nebulizer? Like I shouldn't have to keep running back here to get a nebulizer." And eventually they did. They gave me a nebulizer for the children. I also became asthmatic growing up, you know, being in this environment. So it really affects us. But were we fully educated to say we needed to fight? And I know some people were fighting on the back end, but their cries weren't being addressed or heard for us to continue to get the services. I see you look at Eve. I'm not sure if I'm on the right topic or not, but you're muted. I can't hear you. Eve, you're muted. So it's I would love to see this project go through. I really would. I would tell you that it would be
So much, Maria.
a blessing
All right.
to this community.
All right. And oh, thank you. And we have our assemblywoman here, but we will get into you in quite 2 minutes. Okay. All right. So currently, thank you, Miss Maria, for that. And now we are at traffic. According to the New York State Department of Transportation, the Cross Bronx Expressway carries more than 175,000 vehicles per day, probably closer to 200,000. As you can see, there is standstill, parking lot, level traffic day and night. In 2017, the Cross Bronx Expressway has been rated the most congested highway in America. During the evening rush hour, motorists lose an average of 86 hours a year in 2016, crawling at an average speed of 14 miles an hour along the roughly 7-mile corridor of Interstate 95 that extends from exit 6A to the George Washington Bridge. The morning rush hour on the Cross Bronx Expressway is almost as bad. The section from the New Jersey side of the George Washington to I-95 was rated the third worst roadway in the country, with an average speed of less than 20 miles per hour. Sitting in traffic jams cost U.S. drivers $300 billion in 2016, or about $1,400 per motorist. Our children are sitting in school buses, as you can see on the left-hand picture, breathing in these toxic fumes. As Peter officials said, such was the Bronx to those who beheld it from above, a place to pass through, and in doing so, pass over. The South Bronx is often called Asthma Alley, but if you look at this map, it's actually an asthma cavern. So, Mr. Johnson, could you please interject and introduce yourself?
Yes. Thanks for setting it up, brother. Thanks for having this talk, and I'm glad that I'm on this panel with all you all. We've had so much experience here of what was the onslaught and what came after the creation of the Crossway. And I just want to dig a little deep into how, why this happened and what have we seen since the creation of the Cross Bronx Expressway and how it's plagued out in our communities. Ms. Forbes, Maria mentioned that, about the asthma, and I'm sure Diana will give us, Dr. Hernandez will give us some more statistics on the rates of asthma and how it's affecting our community. But the creation of the Cross Bronx was the start of the top-down type of planning that has occurred over and over again in this community. It's helped create poverty rates. 49% of our communities lives in poverty. The Cross Bronx was supposed to create jobs. It's supposed to be an economic driver. It never created jobs or economic opportunities for people who lived here. What we got was those 75,000 vehicles per day. That's not counting how many trucks are in that 175,000 that spew diesel truck emissions throughout our community with carcinogens that not only cause asthma, but other respiratory problems and issues, as well as cardiovascular disease. Of those 49% of our community that lives in poverty, 29% are children. So the economic opportunities never happen. What we had is top-down planning that's continued after Robert Moses. He's been like the precursor of the type of planning that's happened here over and over again, creating nothing but more and more of the economic and environmental harm. So, when we look at the pathway which was dug for the Cross Bronx, again, it's almost like the footprint was laid, the plan was created to do just that. They had alternatives, but they didn't listen to people who lived here. And often what happens in these types of plans, they never listen to the folks who live in the communities as to how would it be best to create economic opportunity or job creation or healthier outcomes for folks who live in these communities. And it always typically happens in communities of color that are on the lower status of economic opportunity, right? I'm not going to say poor because I think it's more of a economic oppression that's happened here, that's created this situation over and over again. So when we look at not just the rates of poverty, but then the rates of asthma, 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 of our children have asthma. Our community organization, South Bronx Unite, go out to different schools in our community and talk to students in classrooms about environmental justice. And we explain to them, it's not about hugging a tree and loving trees and nature. It's about the right to breathe healthy air. And the first question we usually ask our students is, how many of you all have or know someone who have asthma? And it's always 90% of the children raise their hands. That's environmental racism. It's been normalized that it's just how it is here. It should not be like that. It's not the same way a mile away. The more economically affluent communities are, the less they deal with congestion and poor air quality. And we know air quality is a price on it. If you make more money, if you live in a more economically affluent area, you breathe different quality of air. That's wrong. We're dealing with environmental racism. We just got to be really clear about what's happening here and why it's happening. And why is it that not only do we have the Cross Bronx, and why do we have the Deegan Expressway running through shouldering our community? Why do we have the Bruckner Expressway? Why do we have the Sheridan Expressway? Why do we handle so much traffic for folks to get to Manhattan or the other 4 boroughs or upstate? Why do we have to traverse through this community of color that's been historically for 5 decades treated with had to carry the rough end of the stick? But not only are we handling the traffic is a huge congestion and a huge problem of air quality in this community, but we're also in the South Bronx, but we're also shouldering a burden for industrial development that has not also created any jobs, waste transfer stations and fossil fuel power plants littering our peninsula till we have very little to no access, even though we're shouldering the burden for waste, for energy generation, for industrial sightings, and for traffic that traverses through our community, where our children don't have the access that children in other parts of the city have. We live in the richest country in the world, in the richest city of the world, the financial capital. And we're about 5 miles from Wall Street, but the world we live in is so much different. When we have political elected officials say there's a tale of 2 cities that needs to stop, it has not stopped. And so I'm glad we're talking about how we create different opportunities. How do we create the plan for change? And that comes from the ground up, not from the top down. Because they don't know what we know. We're the experts because we live here. So I'm looking forward to talk about some of the opportunities to create different outcomes and different plans of how we cover and cap over that Cross Bronx Expressway, how we do other things about the other highways that are encircling us, and how do we better increase the quality of life for our neighbors, so we can be the best brothers and sisters keepers we can for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Powerful words. And now let's put a face to what Mr. Johnson was talking about.
I'm sorry, but I don't think I can't hear it, brother. I don't know if others can as well.
Well, you can jump in. Basically the video disclosed a young lady from the South Bronx who is one of her greatest or her greatest ills when we're talking about things that are happening in urban environments is violence. Her biggest worry is trees, literally, not someone else, but literally trees. And that was what she was disclosing because the air quality for her asthma is so bad here. But Michael, you can go ahead and on this slide.
Yeah, that'd be great. And yeah, I really wish folks could have saw that video. That girl who was playing that instrument had asthma, and saw the only way to relieve herself was playing that musical instrument, and how she was really concerned with truck traffic, and she knew that it talks about trees, but also how it was hard because of how trucks are all or where they lived. And I think that the systemic problem that exists when you put too many things of the built environment are negative impacts in one community, which creates high rates of poverty, for Black and brown people, right? It creates higher levels of unemployment. Even pre-COVID, we had unemployment rates like 3 times the national rate. So if all the economic development happened in this community really was for this community, we wouldn't have those higher unemployment rates. We wouldn't have such high asthma rates if the money was really going to solutions and not just to band-aid problems. We found out in some fights we've had for environmental justice that the cognitive development in our children is directly linked to the air quality they breathe. So it's no real mystery why we have one of the poorest performing school districts in the city of New York. Because the air quality our children are breathing. Because we have to go home, and Diana can talk to you about the air quality is terrible inside as well, because of other things that are there that are not being handled properly by those who are managing these structures. So, I mean, we have to really be creative in looking at the nucleus of issues and how we can solve the root problems so it can become a more holistic approach to community health and making sure that, we can decrease our rates of asthma, increase our air quality, increase our levels of poverty, and I think it's not going to happen from outside. It's not going to happen from top down. And so solutions is what we need to talk about. And I'm just really happy that, we're able to talk about solutions because it's always easy to identify a problem.
Yeah.
But we identify solutions that we can gather around and mobilize around and make happen.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you, Michael. Before going to the next slide, Bronx unemployment is now at least 21%, although local sources put it to close to 40. The neighborhoods around the Cross Bronx Expressway comprise of the second most rent burdened community district in the city. Almost 60% of families in Community District 5 spend more than 35% of their household income on rent. And then came COVID. People living in the poorest New York City neighborhoods are dying from coronavirus at more than double the rate of those in more affluent neighborhoods. Out-of-borough working class and low-income neighborhoods have suffered the highest death rates. As the mayor noted, the same areas suffering from COVID-19 deaths have long lacked adequate medical care that might have prevented some of the underlying conditions, such as diabetes, hypertension, but more importantly, asthma, which are more prevalent in low-income communities. The city has released data that shows stark racial disparities in deaths from the coronavirus, with Black and Latino residents dying at roughly twice the rate of white people. That trend has continued, with Latino residents dying at the highest rate, followed by Black residents. High poverty neighborhoods have had more cases of COVID-19, but the gap in cases is smaller than the gap in death rates. That suggests that residents of poor neighborhoods are both more likely to contract the virus and more likely to die if they get it. And at the height of the pandemic earlier this year, Bronx residents were twice as likely to die from COVID as our neighbors in the other boroughs. Highway pollution and COVID-19. Now, there is a new study research that suggests the exposure to air pollution like that's coming from Cross Bronx is associated with higher COVID-19 death rates. Scientists have now found that Bronx ranks the worst of COVID-19 death rates and respiratory hazards amongst the 3,000 counties across the United States. Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Queens rank second, third, and sixth. What's more, Bronx neighborhoods like Morris Heights, which I am the district leader and Assemblywoman Joyner, who is on this panel overseas, which is located in an overly congested intersection of the Cross Bronx Expressway and the Major Deegan, shoulder an outsized burden of the city's COVID death toll. In fact, as of late September, more than 4,000 Bronxites have succumbed to the virus. The Morris Heights zip code of 10453 has topped a positivity rate of 25%. Dr. Hernandez, would you like to interject?
I basically will situate that reality in a few things. So first, that social distancing is a privilege. Those of us that are able to work from home, for instance, are able to shield ourselves in many ways. But for the essential workers who have to be out and about, and that's any number of folks that we know and love and that are part of our families and part of our community, have had to be out there. And so they have a higher risk of exposure from that reality, but also because living at home also means, when we talk about rent burden, the consequence of that is overcrowded homes or where you have doubled and tripled up families living in an apartment. And ultimately, that also means that one person or the few people that are headed out to work then go home and are infecting their loved ones unwillingly. That's a part of the reality. During the epidemic here in New York City, when they kind of found that most of the people that were in the hospital were actually staying at home, but a loved one was out in the areas. And so, these are, and the reliance on public transportation is another factor. And also it's just the idea that, when COVID was first introduced as a global issue, globally, it's older age that makes people vulnerable. In the United States, it's actually race and ethnicity that makes people both poorer and sicker. And so at the root of what we see as the kind of prevalence rates of infection and deaths due to COVID is really systemic racism and economic oppression that have made it almost impossible for people of color and for low-income people to benefit from jobs that not only pay well, but offer protections, sick leave policies that protect workers, etc. And this is part of the backdrop of the COVID-19 kind of context to date.
Add something to that? Yes, you said you're muted. I couldn't hear you. So I would just like to say that on the double up situation, being a tenant association for public housing for over 30 years, when I tell you the mass amount of families that are not double up, they're tripled up. And if they have a 4-bedroom, then that's 4 families living in a 4-bedroom apartment prior to COVID, during to COVID, and then people losing their jobs. That's going to be another influx of additional families doubling up to tripling up because either they lost their apartment, they lost their job, what have you, and now that's gonna even enhance this asthma to the pandemic even more. And it's just so important that we address this matter. I've been trying to have the Housing Authority address this matter for some time. Latoya Jonah knows that, and she's been working on it for some time, but it just falls on deaf ears. So when we lose the economic development in our communities, we also lose issues addressed. We also lose having, even through the census, we lose not having people register because we can't build another school, another daycare center, another hospital, any other things that are beneficial to our communities and servicing our people. But that doubling up is
Muted.
So much. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. All right. So now, what can we do? Bold idea to green freeways to remain in service. We call these freeway cap parks or decks, with parks built in airspace directly above below grade freeway sections. So basically, an existing highway that is current and adding a new infrastructure over it, right? But at the same time, the new infrastructure that's added would be incorporated with green infrastructure. Positive impacts include the ability to reintegrate communities, conceal traffic, improve air quality, and provide green space addressing existing disparities in park access. And on ways of doing that, you need legislation help and a policy and a political representative. And with that being said, I would like to introduce Assemblywoman Joyner. At this time, if you can, would you like to speak and talk about what are you doing on the legislative end? You can unmute yourself, Assemblywoman. Um, uh, Hold on, let's see. Yeah, we can't hear you, Assemblywoman, unfortunately. Now you. Mm. Well, we'll. No, I can't. No. I believe maybe you would have to sign if you can. Maybe that would work. All right. All right. But until then, let's All right. Hold on. But until then, we can move forward. And when she gets her audio, we will jump right to her. One example of reinventing, or I call it retrofying our community, retrofitting infrastructures while rectifying all the institutional racism that was imposed on our community, right? So that's a new term I'm coining. I'm rolling with it. So one is the Sheridan Expressway in the Bronx. Similar initiatives to cap and convert polluted roadways are taking place all over the country. The Sheridan Expressway, currently a congested interstate highway, is being transformed into a boulevard, opening up access to shops and the waterfront in the South Bronx. New York State is converting the 1.3-mile stretch connecting the Bruckner Expressway and Cross Bronx in the South Bronx into an urban boulevard that would reunite Bronx residents with the waterfront that became inaccessible when the roadway, which was known as Interstate 895, opened in 1963. In 2017, Governor Cuomo said, building the Sheridan Expressway was a mistake. All goes back to Robin Moses. Construction is underway on the signalized pedestrian crossing, traffic median, and landscaping that would transform the at-gate interstate into an urban boulevard. In terms of budget, this is a $700 million state finance project. Next, we have the Rose F. Kennedy Greenway, located in Boston, Massachusetts. The infamous Big Dig project that relocated several freeways underground resulted in the Rose F. Kennedy Greenway, which opened in phases beginning in 2008. This 1.5 mile, 15-acre ribbon includes 5 parks, including a brand new carousel. City Ark River 2015 in St. Louis, Missouri. Ground broke last month on this park over Interstate 70 as part of the City Ark River 2015, a $380 million renovation of the Gateway Arch and Riverfront. It's not a huge park, but it will pack a big punch by connecting the arch's ground with the rest of the city. Park 101 in Los Angeles. The city that you might say invented the freeway has 2 proposals on the 101 freeway alone. In downtown, Park 101 would connect Union Station and the historical center of LA with the Civic Center and the rest of downtown across the freeway. A few miles away, Hollywood Central Park is a 44-acre proposed to green the gash through mostly residential neighborhoods just east of Hollywood Business District. Both proposals are currently approved by the city and to seek funding. The New West Loop in Chicago, Illinois. Chicago's Central Area Action Plan has long advocated for a freeway cap, but a new proposal called the New West Loop would cover 3 blocks of the Kennedy Expressway to create not only a park, but a new hub of office buildings for tech firms to occupy. The Woodall-Rogers Freeway in Dallas, Texas. Before and after, where portions of Woodall-Rogers was capped, creating a 5.2-acre Clyde Warren Park in 2012. So on the left-hand side, you see what was once the highway, and on the right-hand side is in existence currently the capping of that highway. The highway is still there, but now we have a beautiful park that is over the highway, emitting beautiful oxygen to our community. Again, the Woodall-Rogers Freeway. 5 acres over the Woodall-Rogers Freeway are reclaimed late last year when the Clyde Warren Park opened in downtown Dallas. The Slender Park offers fountains, dog runs, a game area, and a $3 million annual operating budget for program. And now, the treeway of the Cross Bronx Expressway. Researchers at Columbia University evaluated the cost effectiveness of capping the 2.4 miles of below grade sections of the Cross Bronx Expressway with public space and found that building a park over the sunken segments would increase access to public space and physical activity, decreasing noise pollution and improving cardiovascular and mental health. In this model, those benefits would outweigh the expense of building the deck parks, since they estimate building deck parks over 2.4 miles of the Cross Bronx would cost around $750 million. The benefits would occur financially, mainly in the form of higher property values with subsidies and other affordable protections for existing residents, to public mental health, mainly increased physical activity and cardiovascular fitness thanks to improved park access. The researchers found that the project would generate an extra $1,600 per person. In terms of life expectancy, the park would add nearly 2 months of quality adjusted life per person due to fewer pedestrian accidents, reducing pollution, and as well as opportunities in exercising. Peter Mewing, A professor at Health Policy and Management at Columbia notes that it's extremely rare for social policy investments to save both money and lives. Examples include vaccines and basic automobile safety measures like seatbelts. Turning a highway into a park is like a seatbelt or a vaccine for the whole neighborhood. So, Dr. Hernandez, would you like to interject?
Is actually a colleague of mine, and I'll just say that at the root of what was also kind of understood to be an issue in COVID is obesity and hypertension. We know that people that have chronic illnesses are not only disproportionately impacted, but also face more kind of fatal and more severe consequences from this. And so anything that helps us to increase life expectancy and decrease disability, so quality adjusted life years are about the quality of life and your health span, not just your lifespan, are all really critical for plans like this. So it's not just about saving. It's a beautiful, there's a beautification aspect to this, but there's also certainly the opportunities for people to live better lives, from having better respiratory health to having more opportunities for access to green space and the mental health benefits that come along with that. This is really, kind of holistically thinking about the community members and then whole people and whole children and whole families, as well as the whole community, and kind of reconnecting the dots. And also finding opportunities for people to just live better as a result of an investment like this.
Thank you. Reasonable proposal.
And also that public housing is selling off a great, enormous amount of their property. So now the children, the youth, the senior, everyone is losing the public space where you could just come outside and sit. Now they're losing the parks on public housing property, and they're also losing the parking space. So I see where this program is definitely, and this cap would be so beneficial throughout that little short run of space that we're looking to use, because there are many developments connected to the Cross Bronx Expressway. Just coming off of the George Washington Bridge, you will see. And there's no more space left for people to enjoy, because why? The industrial, everything is coming up, but it's coming up and replacing additional housing, but no space to play. I just want to add, and I end with this, that when I sat on the committee for the Jerome Avenue space, I said, how could you build so much more housing and not build two more elementary schools, two more junior high, to two more public schools, and additional libraries and things for the community to have to play with, because we lose so much space. We lose that with people not doing the census as well, that we lose funding to build and enhance our areas. That it would just, this program here, that if we were able to kick it off, it would be ideal, because there's no more space for the youth, for the seniors, and I just know that it would be beneficial to mentally, emotionally, physically, and financially to our community.
Thank you, Maria. All right. Now on the regional proposals. This slide showcases the Regional Plan Association, various proposals for demolishing, decking, and converting various roadways across New York City. These recent proposals are very ironic, since the Cross Bronx was first proposed by the same organization, the RPA, back in 1929. Now, the RPA is saying that state departments of transportation should prioritize improving highway segments that cause harm to neighborhoods, health, prosperity, and cohesion, and work with communities and municipalities to remove or transform them into community assets. Michael, would you like to share with your recent battle with organizations that found a way to incorporate themselves in our borough without evolving with our needs?
Just one more moment. I think Latoya may have gotten on audio lead. because she couldn't get back in through the picture. Is
Okay.
she here? Could anyone check to see if she's on by phone? Latoya?
I will ensure before we end that she gets a chance to speak.
There she is. We
All
still
right.
we still don't have her, but we have her visually.
All right.
There's a message
Well,
in
my
the chat for her to do the wagon wheel to maybe adjust her audio input. I don't know if you see that in the chat, guys. But going back to your question, should we get her in? Because I would love to hear what she has to say.
yeah.
Can you repeat your question? I'm sorry.
I just wanted to ask. You have battles with a lot of organizations in the Bronx, especially in terms of transportation wise, evolve well, the movement or the growing of new organizations and the lack thereof evolution of health quality to our community.
I what I could add to that is, some of the top-down decision making that we've seen with Robert Moses, when identifying or seeing these types of things happen again, it's caused us to stand up as community-based organizations and say, stop. If it has to do with rezoning, or if it had to do with bringing in more heavy diesel truck intensive businesses that have not thoroughly done environmental impact statements. I think, we have been really conscious as an organization and in collaboration with like the Melbourne School of Public Health that Diana works with at Columbia, where we've been able to see, well, if they're not doing thorough analysis of our air quality and traffic, then it's upon us to try to collaborate with those who can help work with us to do it ourselves, right? So if we don't know the true volume or the impact of the Cross Bronx Expressway on air quality, then we should try to do it ourselves with collaboration. So what we did was we've collaborated to create air quality monitoring and traffic counting along the highway systems in the South Bronx, and to determine how many trucks and cars are going through our community and what is the impact on the air. So we, used one example of one institution coming to our community, the relocation of Fresh Direct back in 2012, to bring 1,000 more diesel trucks to our community every day. And we paid for it in the tune of $150 million of taxpayer subsidies. But they relied on that move on an environmental impact statement that was 21 years old. And so even though advocacy committee groups stood up and told the state and the city, that, hey, do a thorough analysis as how this is going to affect us. Don't do the Robert Moses again, right? Don't keep creating cross Bronx expressways with projects throughout our community without determining what kind of environmental impact will it do to a community that's been noted as Asthma Alley. Like Diana said, not only do we have high rates of asthma, but obesity and diabetes, a lot of which comes to, in the South Bronx, lack of recreational space because we've been so built up. So how do we make sure that we are really attuned and make sure that we keep our people informed as to how these institutions and how these developments are affecting our community, especially the Cross Bronx Expressway and the other highways as well. So, state DOT, the federal government have a responsibility to our communities in terms of what they put here. How can we make sure that they're responsible in mitigating it? Because if it was a white community that was more economically affluent, it would not be going down the way it's going down here. So, so we have to have research-driven solutions. Because just us knowing it's a problem, people dying here of asthma and poor air quality is seemingly not enough.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to do our due diligence and partner with institutions that will assist us in getting the data we need to create the solutions that are necessary.
Wow, thank you so much, Michael. And now we're back to our first slide, and we'll end the presentation. But before that, I definitely would like to get the Assemblywoman on. But as our final We should move ahead boldly, centering racial justice in our collective effort to retrofy the Cross Bronx. And that goes by retrofitting the infrastructures while rectifying the historical injustices perpetuated by not just Robert Moses, but all those master planners from back in the day. As USC urban scholar Douglas Houston and Michelle Zinga noted, Dallas's Clyde Warren Park is an economic success story, but it illustrates how developers use cap parks to sideline equity concerns. Thus, cap parks should be embraced as a vital component of a green infrastructure that reconnects in green cities divided by freeways, construction, but planners should take strong steps to address housing affordability and gentrification concerns for adjacent communities. And that is the end of our presentation. Um, we are so grateful and thankful for everyone that joined us today. Um, Thankfully, well, we had no hiccups. I wish our assemblywoman could voice her thoughts and things that she's doing up in the state. I will share that there's one bill that I know that she has introduced or will be introducing next session called Schools Impacted by Gross Highways, the side bill. So that, of course, would look into air quality and how do we reimagine our children being in educational structures. So with that being said,
I just want to
thank you all.
Can I just add one little thing? So there's a question in the chat by Rochelle who said, how can we support this effort? And so I think there's a lot of interest, but I'm wondering if you have any parting words on how the organization.
Well, first off, you can go on my website, nycyves.com, and to voice your concerns about this. This is a big passion of mine that I'm moving forward. This is one of my agenda items. So please, you can reach me personally, and we can further this discussion because I definitely want this dream to turn into a reality. And more importantly, reaching out to your local elected officials. Unfortunately, Assemblywoman Joyner wasn't uh, had the opportunity to speak, but she is on our side in terms of moving and thinking progressively and bringing a green infrastructure in our community. So I implore anyone that's listening to reach out to your local elected officials. There's a new Green Deal in New York State, so let's grab those funds for our communities, and that is key. Let's start reimagining our communities.
That's right.
All right.
Thank you.
No problem. Any concerns, observations?
This was great. Thank you.
Important
Thank you.
that we address infrastructure, and that is the right.
Oh, now it ended.
So we do ask our officials now. It's over. It's finished.
I think it's
Yeah.
I think it's over. Oh no.
Well, I just wanted to add,
Thank
but
Maria,
in
this conversation, we know that
email address at the bottom. Eve, type your email address in at the.
All right. Thanks so much.
No problem. Y'all take care.
Be safe.
All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Blessings
you so
to
much.
everyone.
Perfect.
We did
All
it.
right.
So now, where is this recorded and left at, Regina? Where's this recorded at? What? You said we was recording it, right? I wasn't covered in the training. He said he was gonna send y'all a link or something on the video. You have to leave if you're gonna network. You're gonna network? Network.